So what? You just push paperwork for the army. My cousin smirked at the barbecue. I wiped my hands on a napkin. No, I said. I fly. He laughed. Oh yeah? What's your call sign? I answered, Iron Widow. His dad, a Navy SEAL, froze. Son, apologize right now. He knew exactly who I was. You know, there are moments in life when you just hit your limit. You smile through the snide remarks, let someone else hog the spotlight, and keep your head down. But when that person, your own cousin no less, mocks your entire career, your life's work, right in front of his Navy SEAL father, something inside you just snaps. What happened next wasn't about revenge, but it sure as hell changed everything. Have you ever been completely underestimated? Treated like you're less than, by someone who has absolutely no idea who you really are or what you've done. I grew up in a perfectly ordinary, middle-class family in Virginia. Our lives revolved around cookouts, birthdays, all in that same backyard where everyone thought they knew exactly what my future held. My cousin, Ryan, was the quintessential golden boy. Loud, athletic, always the center of attention. His dad, Commander Jack Hawking, was a Navy SEAL, the kind of man who carried quiet authority, a deep sense of respect. As a kid, I looked up to him so much. I wanted to make him proud. When I joined the Air Force, most of my family just saw it as a phase. They joked that I was too quiet, too careful for such a path. I never corrected them. I didn't need to. I just studied harder, flew longer hours, and eventually, I earned my wings. By the time I was 27, I was an Air Force captain, a pilot with deployments already under my belt, and a call sign that stuck, Iron Widow. But somehow, family gatherings never changed. It was always the same burgers, the same stories, and the same subtle condescension from the relatives who had never really left home. Ryan's teasing, especially, used to just roll right off me. Used to. That backyard was like a time capsule every summer. The red brick patio, the old grill my dad had owned since I was 10, kids running through sprinklers. My mom would always put out her potato salad and coleslaw in those plastic bowls with lids that never quite sealed. And my dad, an engineer who spent his career designing systems for defense contractors, would stand by the grill, beer in hand, nodding along to whatever story was being told. He was proud of me, I knew that. He just wasn't the type to say it out loud. He'd just squeeze my shoulder when I came home on leave and ask if I was eating enough. Ryan's mom, Marianne, was my dad's sister. She had that permanent hostess smile, you know, the kind that smooths over every awkward moment and pretends everything is fine, even when it's clearly not. She'd hug me tight and say, look at you, all grown up, like I was still 12. They all meant well. Most of them did. But Ryan had become someone I barely recognized. When we were kids, he was fun, reckless in that way boys are when they think they're invincible. We'd climb trees, race bikes, throw rocks into the creek. He looked up to his father, like all military kids do. But somewhere along the way, that admiration curdled into something else. He started wearing his father's legacy like a borrowed jacket, too big, never quite fitting right. By the time I enlisted, Ryan had dropped out of community college and was working at a gym, training clients, talking about discipline like he'd invented it. He'd tell stories at family dinners about pushing through pain and mental toughness, and everyone would just nod along, like he'd actually earned the right to speak on it. Meanwhile, I was at Lackland Air Force Base, running until my lungs burned, learning to fly aircraft that cost more than every house on our block combined. I didn't talk about it much, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't need to. The work, I believed, spoke for itself. When I came home after my first deployment, my uniform still held a faint scent of jet fuel and desert dust. I'd been flying close air support missions out of Bagram, long hours in the cockpit, eyes scanning for targets, coordinating with ground units, doing everything I could to make sure our people came home. It wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting, precise, and absolutely necessary. Ryan saw the uniform and, of course, smirked. You look tired, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. What, paper jams at headquarters? The room went absolutely silent. My mother's smile faltered. My father set his beer down a little too hard. Commander Hawking, who'd been laughing at something one of the uncles said, glanced over at me. His expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe respect, maybe apology. But he didn't correct his son. I just laughed it off, something like that. That was the first time I truly realized how deep the imbalance ran. Ryan needed to be the tough one, the military-adjacent one, the one people respected by association. And I was just the quiet girl who flew planes. Nobody asked what that meant. Nobody really wanted to know. I'd earned my wings at 23 after a year of rigorous training that washed out more than half my class. Flight school wasn't about being brave. It was about being precise, calm under pressure, able to make split-second decisions when lives hung in the balance. I wasn't the best pilot in my class, but I was consistent. I didn't panic. I didn't freeze. And when the instructors pushed us harder, I pushed back. My call sign came later, during my second deployment. Call signs aren't something you choose, you know? They're given to you by your squadron, usually after you've done something memorable, sometimes embarrassing, sometimes legendary. Mine came after a night mission in Helmand Province. A mission I still don't talk about at family gatherings. We'd been flying support for a SEAL recon team that got pinned down in a valley. The extraction corridor was hot, enemy fire lighting up the ridge lines, RPG streaking across the sky. The original extraction heli took damage and had to pull back. The team was stranded, taking casualties, running low on ammo. Command was scrambling for options. I was circling overhead in my A-10 Warthog, low on fuel, already past the point where I should have returned to base. My wingman, Captain Drew Sanderson, was trying to talk me down. "Widow, we're bingo fuel. We have to go." I looked at the coordinates, at the thermal images of the team below, and I made a choice. Negative. I'm making a pass. I dropped low, lower than doctrine recommended, and lit up that ridge line with everything I had. 30mm cannon fire, precision that came from muscle memory and 1,000 hours of training. I cleared the corridor long enough for the backup heli to get in and pull them out. Every single SEAL made it home. When I landed back at base, my aircraft had taken fire. Not enough to down me, but enough that maintenance gave me a look that said I'd used up some luck. My squadron commander didn't reprimand me. He just nodded and walked away. 2 days later, the call sign was official, Iron Widow. The pilot who didn't leave people behind. Commander Hawking knew that story. He'd served with some of those SEALs. He knew what it meant when someone flew into a hot zone to pull out a team. But he never told Ryan. And Ryan never asked. He just kept talking about discipline, about toughness, about things he'd never actually done. I didn't resent him for it, not really. Resentment takes energy, and I was too busy flying, training, leading. But I noticed the pattern. Every family gathering, every holiday, every backyard barbecue, Ryan would find a way to diminish what I did. It was never outright hostile, just casual, dismissive. "Oh, Brittany's home. How's the office job?" Or, "Must be nice. Flying a desk." And every time, the family would laugh. Uncomfortable, but unwilling to intervene. My mother would change the subject. My father would clear his throat. Commander Hawking would look at me with that same unreadable expression, and I'd wonder if he was waiting for me to defend myself, or if he thought I didn't need to. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my work. I had my squadron. I had the respect of the people who actually understood what I did. That should have been enough. And most days, it was. The older Ryan got, the more he leaned on his father's shadow. He bragged about military discipline he never earned and dismissed my career as desk duty. When I came home on leave after a deployment in Kandahar, he smirked across the dinner table. "You look tired." "What, paper jams at headquarters?" I laughed it off, even as the room went quiet. Commander Hawking gave me a nod, maybe respect, maybe apology, but said nothing. The imbalance grew. Every family event became a low-grade performance. Ryan, the loud civilian hero. Me, the quiet professional who probably just files flight plans. No one corrected him. I didn't need validation from them. Or so I told myself. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to move. People who don't take you seriously don't watch you as closely. They don't ask questions. They don't notice when you've changed, grown, become someone they wouldn't recognize if they actually looked. I was 29 when I returned from Kandahar. That deployment had been different, longer, harder, more complex. We'd been flying missions in support of ground operations, providing close air support for convoys, reconnaissance for special operations teams, medevac cover when things went sideways. I'd logged over 200 combat hours in 6 months. My squadron commander had put me in for an accommodation. I didn't talk about it at home. Ryan was 31 by then, still working at the gym, still living in the same apartment he'd rented after moving out of his parents' house. He had a girlfriend who seemed nice enough, though she always looked a little tired when she came to family gatherings, like she'd already heard all of Ryan's stories twice. At that particular dinner, my Aunt Mary had made lasagna. The house smelled like garlic and tomato sauce, and my younger cousins were running around the living room playing some game that involved a lot of yelling. My mother was helping in the kitchen, and my father was out back with Commander Hawking, talking about something related to naval architecture. I'd just arrived, still in my civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse. Nothing that suggested I'd spent the last 6 months in a war zone. Ryan saw me first. "Brittany, how's the Air Force treating you?" I set my bag down by the door. "Good. Busy." He grinned, that same easy grin he'd always had, the one that made people like him even when he was being insufferable. "Yeah, I bet. You've been up to filing reports, scheduling flights." I could have corrected him. I could have told him about the mission where we'd provided cover for a medevac extraction under fire, or the night I'd flown low enough to draw enemy attention away from a convoy that was taking casualties. I could have mentioned the commendation, the fact that I was being considered for early promotion to major. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't owe him an explanation. Something like that, I said. He laughed, and a few other relatives joined in. That polite, uncomfortable laughter that fills the space when no one knows what else to say. My mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and gave me a look that said, "Let it go." So I did. I let it go the way I always did. But something shifted that night. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Or maybe it was the realization that I'd been letting this happen for years. I'd been so focused on proving myself in the places that mattered, in the cockpit, with my squadron, in combat, that I'd never bothered to set the record straight at home. And that silence had allowed Ryan to build his own narrative, one where I was just a pilot who did paperwork, and he was the one who understood what toughness really meant. After dinner, I found Commander Hawking on the back porch. He was standing by the railing, looking out at the yard, a beer in his hand. He glanced over when I stepped outside, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "Heard you did good work in Kandahar," he said finally. I shrugged. "Just my job." He nodded slowly, and I could see him weighing his words, deciding how much to say. Ryan doesn't mean anything by it. You know, he's just trying to find his place. I looked at him then, really looked at him. Commander Jack Hawking, a man who'd spent 25 years in the Navy, who'd led teams into some of the most dangerous places on Earth, who'd earned every ounce of respect he carried. And here he was, making excuses for his son. "I know," I said, "but he doesn't get to define my place." He didn't respond, but something in his expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, maybe even approval. He raised his beer in a small, quiet toast, and I nodded back. The next family gathering was a 4th of July barbecue. Same backyard, same grill, same relatives. Ryan was there with his girlfriend, talking loudly about a new training program he was developing, something about functional fitness and mental resilience. I was standing near the cooler, pulling out a soda, when he turned to me. "So, Brittany, you ever think about doing something more hands-on? I mean, flying's cool and all, but it's not like you're really in the fight, you know." I popped the tab on the soda and took a sip, letting the moment stretch. My father, who'd been flipping burgers nearby, went still. My mother's conversation with Aunt Marion faltered. And Commander Hawking, who'd been standing on the other side of the patio, turned his head slightly, watching. I met Ryan's eyes. "I am in the fight, Ryan. That's the part you don't understand." He blinked, caught off guard by my directness. "I didn't mean." "I know what you meant," I said. "And I'm telling you, you're wrong." The silence that followed was different from the usual uncomfortable pauses. This one had weight. My father went back to the grill, but I saw the hint of a smile on his face. My mother gave me a small nod. And Commander Hawking, he raised his beer again, just slightly, that same quiet toast. Ryan didn't push it. He changed the subject, started talking about something else, but the dynamic had shifted. For the first time, I'd drawn a line, and everyone had seen it. I didn't need to explain myself, didn't need to justify my career or my choices. But I also didn't need to let someone else's insecurity define me. That was the lesson I'd been learning slowly, painfully, over years of deployments and family gatherings. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And sometimes, it's something you claim. Ryan and I didn't talk much for the rest of that summer. Not out of anger, but out of a new, unspoken understanding. He built his identity around proximity to toughness, and I'd built mine around actually living it. We were never going to see eye to eye, and that was okay. I had my life, he had his, and the family was finally starting to see the difference. The turning point came at another summer barbecue. Red cups, kids playing tag, country music humming in the background. Ryan was in full showman mode, telling exaggerated stories about his training. It was late August, the kind of humid Virginia afternoon where the air felt thick enough to swim through. My father had set up the grill early, and by noon, the backyard was full. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors who'd been coming to these gatherings for so long they were practically family. Someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker, and classic rock was playing at a volume just loud enough to be background noise without drowning out conversation. I'd been home for 3 days, a brief leave between training cycles. I was 31 by then, still a captain, but the promotion board results were due any day. I'd been recommended for major by my squadron commander, and if the board agreed, I'd pin on the oak leaves by my next birthday. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. It felt like tempting fate. Ryan was holding court near the picnic table, a cluster of younger cousins and a few neighbors gathered around him. He was talking about some new certification he'd gotten, something related to high-intensity interval training. He had that animated quality he always got when he had an audience, gesturing with his hands, his voice carrying across the yard. I was at the grill, helping my father with the burgers. He'd asked me to watch the temperature while he went inside for more propane, and I was standing there with the spatula, watching the meat sizzle, when Ryan's voice cut through the chatter. "So what? You file paperwork for the Army." I looked up. He was grinning at me. That same easy grin. But there was something performative about it. He wanted a reaction. Wanted to be the funny one. The guy who could get away with teasing his accomplished cousin because, hey, it was all in good fun, right? I wiped my hands on a napkin, taking my time. No, I fly. He laughed, and a few people around him laughed too, uncertain. Oh yeah, what's your call sign then? The question hung in the air. Call signs aren't something most civilians understand. They think it's like a nickname, something cool you get to pick for yourself. They don't realize it's a mark of respect, earned through actions, given by the people who fly beside you. And they definitely don't realize that some call signs carry a weight beyond the squadron. I met his eyes. Iron Widow. The name hit like a drop in pressure before a storm. The laughter stopped. A few people glanced at each other, confused by the sudden shift in tone. And Commander Jack Hawking, who'd been laughing with my father and a couple of uncles near the cooler, went completely still. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity I'd rarely seen outside of formal military settings. For a moment, he just stared, and I could see him running through his mental files, connecting dots, verifying what he'd just heard. Then he looked at his son. Boy, apologize now. Ryan froze. The grin slid off his face, replaced by confusion and the first hint of embarrassment. Dad, I was just... The word came out flat, with no room for negotiation. Now, this wasn't a suggestion. This wasn't parental annoyance. This was an order, delivered with the full weight of 2.5 decades of command experience. Ryan's face flushed. He looked at me, then back at his father, trying to understand what had just happened. I didn't mean anything by it. Commander Hawking took 3 steps toward him, closing the distance with that controlled, deliberate movement that said he was exercising restraint. You just disrespected a combat pilot who saved my teammates. You think that's funny? The backyard had gone silent. Even the kids had stopped playing, sensing something significant was happening, even if they didn't understand what. My mother stood frozen by the back door, a pitcher of lemonade in her hands. My father had returned with the propane tank and was standing at the edge of the patio, watching. Ryan's mouth opened and closed. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, Commander Hawking said. You assumed. You mocked. And now you're going to apologize. I saw the moment Ryan's pride wrestled with his survival instinct. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched at his sides. And for a second, I thought he might double down, might try to salvage his dignity by arguing. But then he looked at his father's face and saw something that made him think better of it. He turned to me, and I could see the effort it took. I'm sorry. I didn't know what you did. I nodded, accepting it. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. Not really. Because Commander Hawking wasn't done. He was still standing there, his focus entirely on his son. And when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but somehow more intense. Iron Widow, he said, is the call sign of the pilot who flew into a hot extraction zone in Helmand Province to pull out a SEAL recon team that was pinned down and taking casualties. She flew low enough that she took fire herself. She cleared the corridor long enough for the medevac to get in and extract every single man. Do you understand what that means? Ryan nodded, but I could tell he didn't. Not really. He understood that it was significant, that his father respected it. But the actual reality of what I'd done, the calculations, the fear management, the precision required to put an aircraft exactly where it needed to be while people were shooting at you, that was beyond his frame of reference. Commander Hawking looked at me then, and his expression softened just slightly. My unit still talks about you. They don't know your real name, but they know Iron Widow, the pilot who doesn't leave people behind. I felt my throat tighten. I'd done that mission 3 years ago, and I'd tried not to think about it too much since. Not because it wasn't important, but because dwelling on it made it harder to do the next mission and the one after that. You can't fly if you're thinking about all the ways it could go wrong. I did my job, I said. You did more than that, he said. And my son is going to remember that from now on. He turned back to Ryan, and there was something almost sad in his expression. You want respect? You earn it. You don't tear down someone else to build yourself up. Understood. Ryan nodded, his face still flushed, his embarrassment now mixed with something that looked like shame. Yes, sir. Commander Hawking clapped him once on the shoulder, firm but not harsh, and then walked away, heading toward the cooler for another beer. The tension broke slowly, conversations resuming in fits and starts, people trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed something uncomfortable and significant. My father came over to the grill, taking the spatula from my hand. He didn't say anything, just squeezed my shoulder the way he always did, that brief acknowledgement that meant more than words. My mother appeared at my side, setting down the lemonade and pulling me into a quick, tight hug. Proud of you, she whispered. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Ryan stayed on the other side of the yard for the rest of the afternoon. He talked to his girlfriend, helped his mother carry food out, played with his younger cousins, but he didn't come near me. And I didn't seek him out. We both needed space to process what had happened. But as the sun started to set and people began packing up to leave, I caught him watching me from across the yard. Our eyes met, and for just a moment, I saw something different in his expression. Not respect, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding, the realization that the world was bigger than he thought, and that toughness came in forms he'd never considered. I gave him a small nod, and after a hesitation, he nodded back. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even really a truce. But it was a start. After that day, the family dynamic shifted. Ryan avoided me. His father didn't. A week later, he stopped by quietly. No uniform, no rank, just a man showing respect. He knocked on my apartment door at 1800 hours on a Tuesday. I was in running clothes, about to head out for my evening PT, when I heard it. Through the peephole, I saw Commander Hawking standing in the hallway, wearing jeans and a navy t-shirt, hands in his pockets. No formal visit, no ceremony, just him. I opened the door. "Sir." He shook his head. "Jack. Just Jack tonight." I stepped aside and let him in. My apartment was sparse. Military standard, I used to joke. A couch, a TV, a small kitchen table with 2 chairs, books on aviation and military history lining one shelf. A few photos on another, my squadron, my parents, a shot of me standing in front of my aircraft after my first solo flight. Nothing personal enough to hurt if I had to pack it all up and move on short notice. He looked around, nodded slowly, then turned to me. "You got a minute?" "Of course." We sat at the kitchen table. I offered coffee, but he declined, so we just sat there in the kind of silence that would have been awkward with anyone else. With him, it felt appropriate. Commander Hawking wasn't a man who wasted words. When he spoke, it mattered. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, "for not saying something sooner." I shook my head. "You don't owe me an apology." "I do," he said. "I knew what you'd done. I knew your call sign. Knew the story. And I let my son mock you at family gatherings because I thought." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I thought it was harmless. I thought you were strong enough to handle it, and you were. But that doesn't make it right." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to tell him it didn't matter, that I'd learned to let those comments roll off me. But another part, the part that had been carrying the weight of being underestimated for years, needed to hear what he was saying. "I was strong enough to handle it," I said. "But I shouldn't have had to." He nodded. "No, you shouldn't have." He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked tired. Not physically, but in the way people look when they're carrying regret. Ryan's my son, and I love him, but I haven't done him any favors by letting him coast on my reputation. I don't know what I thought, that he'd figure it out on his own, that he'd find his own path. But instead, he's built his whole identity around proximity to something he's never actually done. He's not a bad person, I said, and I meant it. Ryan was insecure, performative, sometimes insufferable, but he wasn't malicious. He was just lost. "No, he's not," Jack agreed. "But he's a coward in ways that matter. And that's on me as much as it is on him." We sat with that for a moment. Through the window, I could see the sun setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm went off and then stopped. "You flew that night in Hellman," Jack said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. You know, one of those SEALs was my former EXO, Lieutenant Commander Barnes. He told me about it when he got back stateside. Said there was a pilot who came in low, cleared the corridor, took fire to do it. He said he owed his life to someone with a call sign Iron Widow. But he didn't know who you were. Didn't know your real name." I nodded slowly. "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know," Jack said. "That's what makes it matter." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small coin, a Navy SEAL challenge coin, worn at the edges from years of being carried. He set it on the table between us. "This is from my unit, from the guys who were there that night and the ones who came after. Barnes sent it to me, asked me to find you and deliver it. Took me 3 years to realize you were family." I picked up the coin, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cool against my skin. The SEAL trident was embossed on one side, a unit insignia on the other. "I can't accept this," I said. "You already earned it," he said. "That's not up for debate." I closed my fingers around the coin and nodded, not trusting my voice. Jack stood up, and I followed. At the door, he paused and turned back to me. "Ryan's going to have to find his own way. But I'm going to make sure he understands what real service looks like, what real courage looks like, and I'm going to make sure he knows that the people who matter don't need to talk about it constantly. They just do the work." "Thank you," I said. He shook his head. "Thank you for what you did that night and for every night since. For serving with honor even when nobody at home understood what that meant." After he left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the last of the daylight fade. The coin was still in my hand, and I turned it over and over, feeling the ridges and grooves. It was a small thing, really, just a piece of metal, but it represented something larger. Acknowledgement. From the people who actually understood, who'd been there, who knew what it cost. I didn't need my family to understand what I did. I'd known that for years. But having someone like Jack Hawking bridge that gap, to translate my service into terms they might finally comprehend, that mattered more than I'd expected. The next morning, I went for my run and then reported for duty at 0600 hours. My squadron commander called me into his office at 0830. The promotion board results had come through. I was being promoted to major, effective in 30 days. I called my parents that evening to tell them. My mother cried. My father's voice went thick with pride. They'd always supported me, even when they didn't fully understand my career, and hearing their joy reminded me that some things family, love, pride, transcended understanding. I didn't call Ryan. That bridge would have to be rebuilt slowly, if it was rebuilt at all. But I thought about him as I hung up the phone, wondered if his father had talked to him, if he was beginning to see the world differently. I hoped so, for his sake more than mine. The coin sat on my dresser next to my dog tags and my commissioning certificate. I looked at it every morning when I got dressed for work. A reminder that the people who mattered already knew. The rest would catch up eventually, or they wouldn't. Either way, I had a job to do. At the next family gathering, I didn't hide. When someone joked about office pilots, I answered directly, not defensively, just factually. I fly close air support. It's not glamorous, but it saves lives. Ryan tried to pivot the conversation, but the tone was different now. His father's respect had shifted the room. He finally muttered, didn't mean anything by it. I met his eyes. I know. That was all. Boundaries don't always need volume, just clarity. The gathering was in October, a smaller affair than the summer barbecues. Just immediate family and a few close neighbors. The kind of casual Sunday dinner my mother liked to organize when the weather started turning cold. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans cooked with bacon, comfort food that tasted like childhood. I'd been a major for 2 months by then. The promotion had come through on schedule, and I'd pinned on the oak leaves in a small ceremony at the squadron with my flight lead and a few fellow pilots in attendance. My parents had wanted to come, but the timing hadn't worked out. And honestly, I preferred it that way. The ceremony wasn't about them. It was about the work, the service, the commitment to the people I flew with. But I wore the rank when I showed up at my parents' house that Sunday. Not to make a statement, exactly, but because I'd come straight from a morning briefing at the base and hadn't bothered to change. I walked in wearing my service dress uniform, blue coat, silver wings, the new oak leaves on my shoulders. My mother saw me first and stopped mid-sentence in whatever conversation she'd been having with Aunt Marianne. "Oh, Brittany, you look so official." "Sorry," I said, didn't have time to change. My father came out of the kitchen, saw me, and smiled that private smile he got when he was proud but didn't want to make a fuss. "Major," he said, testing out the rank. "Suits you." Ryan was already there, sitting on the couch with his girlfriend, now his fiancée. They'd gotten engaged a month earlier, and my mother had been thrilled, immediately diving into wedding planning with Aunt Marianne. Ryan looked up when I walked in, and I saw him register the uniform, the rank, the insignia. His expression flickered, surprise, maybe a hint of something I couldn't quite name, before settling into neutral. "Hey, Brittany," he said. "Hey." Commander Hawking arrived 20 minutes later with a store-bought pie and a 6-pack of beer. He shook my hand when he saw me, a firm, professional grip, and nodded at the oak leaves. "Congratulations, Major." "Thank you, sir." "Jack," he corrected. The way he always did now. Dinner was easy, comfortable. We ate in the dining room with the good plates my mother only used for family gatherings. Conversations flowed naturally. My father talking about a project at work, Aunt Marianne asking about wedding venues, my mother updating everyone on a cousin who just had a baby. I mostly listened, chiming in when addressed, but content to let the noise wash over me. Then someone, I think it was one of the neighbors, a retired electrician named Frank, who'd known my family for decades, made a joke about pilots. "You know what they say about Air Force pilots, right? They're glorified bus drivers with better offices." He was laughing, clearly not meaning any harm, just repeating some old service rivalry joke he'd probably heard decades ago. A few people chuckled politely. I set down my fork and looked at him. Not angry, not offended, just direct. "I fly close air support. It's not glamorous, but it saves lives." The table went quiet. Frank's smile faltered. "Oh, I didn't mean." "I know," I said, "but since we're talking about it, close air support means I'm providing cover for ground troops in active combat zones. When they're pinned down, taking fire, running low on ammo, I'm overhead. I'm the one making sure they get home." My mother shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the sudden seriousness. Ryan stared at his plate, but Commander Hawking was nodding slightly. And my father had that same proud smile he'd worn earlier. Frank cleared his throat. That's real work." "I apologize. Shouldn't have made light of it." "It's fine," I said, picking up my fork again. "Most people don't know what we do." "That's not a criticism, just a fact." The conversation moved on after that, but something had shifted. People asked me questions, real questions, not jokes. What kind of aircraft did I fly? How long were my deployments? What was it like being one of the few women in my field? I answered honestly, but without embellishment. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just tired of being misunderstood. Tired of letting other people's ignorance shape how I was perceived. Ryan was quiet through most of it. At one point, when I mentioned a mission where we'd provided cover for a convoy that had hit an IED, he interjected, "Sounds intense." "Must be hard, too," he stopped. Seemed to reconsider his words. "Must take a lot of focus." "It does," I said. He nodded. And I saw him glance at his father, who was watching the exchange with that same evaluating expression he always had, like he was measuring his son against some internal standard. After dinner, I helped my mother clear the table while the men moved into the living room. Through the doorway, I could hear Ryan talking to his father, his voice lower than usual, serious. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was different from his usual performance. He sounded like he was actually asking questions instead of holding court. When I brought out the coffee, Ryan caught my eye. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" We stepped out onto the back porch. It was cold, that sharp October cold that promised winter wasn't far off. I wrapped my arms around myself and Ryan handed me his jacket without thinking about it. A small gesture, but notable. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, "for all the stuff I said before. The jokes, the comments. I didn't understand what you actually did." "I know," I said. "My dad talked to me after that barbecue." "Really?" "Talked to me, you know. Not just the usual pep talk stuff. He told me I'd been acting like a jackass, living off his reputation without earning anything of my own." I didn't respond. This wasn't about me validating his feelings or absolving him. This was something he needed to work through on his own. "I'm trying to do better," he continued. "Trying to figure out who I am outside of being his son or the guy who knows military guys. It's harder than I thought." "It usually is," I said. He laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. "Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted you to know. I respect what you do. I should have said that years ago." I handed him back his jacket. "Didn't mean anything by it," I said, echoing his words from the barbecue, but without malice. Just acknowledgement. He smiled, understanding the reference. Fair enough. We went back inside, and the rest of the evening passed without incident. When I left, Commander Hawking walked me to my car. "He's trying," Jack said. "It's clumsy, but he's trying." "I know," I said. "You didn't make it easy on him tonight." "I wasn't trying to make it hard," I said. "I was just being honest." Jack nodded. "Good. He needs to learn that respect isn't given automatically. It's earned, and sometimes it's claimed." I got in my car and drove back to base. The conversation replaying in my mind. I hadn't set out to prove anything that night. I'd just been tired of being small, tired of letting other people's misconceptions define me. And in pushing back, even gently, I'd created space for something different. Not reconciliation, not yet, but possibility. That felt like enough. Ryan struggled with a new balance. Without his father's approval on autopilot, he had to earn it. Meanwhile, my own. Career advanced. Promoted to major at 33, leading a flight unit. At home, the narrative changed quietly. My relatives started introducing me differently, not as our girl in the Air Force, but as Major Hawking, pilot of the 119th Fighter Squadron. Respect doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it's in how people stop underestimating you. The shift wasn't immediate or dramatic. It happened in small increments over the next 2 years, like erosion working on stone. Each family gathering brought subtle changes, a different tone in how people spoke to me, questions that assumed competence rather than quaintness. Introductions that included my rank and position instead of vague references to the military. I made major at 33, which put me slightly ahead of the typical promotion timeline. My squadron commander had written a strong recommendation, emphasizing not just my flight hours and combat record, but my leadership potential. By the time the promotion came through, I'd already been serving as deputy flight commander, managing schedules, training junior pilots, handling the administrative machinery that kept our squadron operational. Leading a flight unit meant responsibility for 12 pilots and their missions. It meant briefings at 0530 hours, debriefings that stretched past 2200, and the weight of knowing that every decision I made could impact whether someone came home. It meant less time in the cockpit and more time managing, planning, coordinating. Some pilots hated the transition from flying to leading. I found I was good at both. Ryan, meanwhile, was struggling. His engagement had ended 6 months after that October dinner. His fiancée deciding she wanted someone with more direction, more stability. He'd quit the gym and started working for a logistics company, driving routes, loading trucks. Honest work, necessary work, but a far cry from the life he'd imagined for himself. I heard about it through my mother, who tried to be diplomatic but couldn't quite hide her concern. "He's just searching," she said during one of our phone calls, "trying to figure out who he's supposed to be." I didn't comment. Ryan's journey wasn't mine to judge or fix. At Christmas that year, he showed up to the family gathering quieter than usual. No big stories, no performance. He helped set up tables, played with the younger cousins, and when someone asked what he was doing for work, he answered simply logistics. It's good work. Commander Hawking had retired from the Navy by then, and retirement suited him. He'd taken a consulting position with a defense contractor, advising on special operations logistics. He seemed more relaxed, less burdened by the weight of active command. He and Ryan were talking more, real conversations instead of the one-sided lectures that had characterized their relationship before. I saw them outside during the Christmas gathering, standing by the fence that bordered my parents' backyard. They were talking quietly, Ryan's hands in his pockets, Jack's arms crossed, but his posture open. Whatever was being said, it looked important. When they came back inside, Ryan caught my eye and nodded. Not apologetic, not performative, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. The following spring, I was offered command of a flight squadron. Not just deputy flight commander anymore, but the full position, squadron commander, responsible for 60 pilots and support personnel. It meant another duty station, a move across the country to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. It meant more responsibility, higher stakes, and the kind of leadership position that could define the rest of my career. I accepted immediately. My family threw me a going-away dinner before I moved. My mother cried, the way she always did when I was leaving. But there was pride mixed with the sadness now. My father gave me a new watch, something practical and precise that he'd clearly spent time selecting. For keeping track of all those missions, he said, and his voice was thick. Commander Hawking gave me a firm handshake and a piece of advice. Command is lonely. Don't forget that the people under you need to see you human sometimes, not just competent. Ryan showed up late, carrying a gift bag. Inside was a book, a biography of Chuck Yeager, the first pilot to break the sound barrier. He'd inscribed the inside cover, asterisk to Brittany, for breaking barriers I didn't even know existed. Proud to be your cousin, Ryan. Asterisk, I looked up at him, surprised. He shrugged, uncomfortable but sincere. Figured you'd appreciate it more than I would. And I wanted you to know. I'm glad you didn't let people like me make you smaller. I couldn't afford to, I said. He smiled, sad but genuine. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that. We hugged briefly, awkwardly, the way family does when they're trying to bridge years of misunderstanding in a single gesture. It wasn't perfect reconciliation. We hadn't magically become close. But it was honest, and that mattered more. The move to Nellis was intense. Taking command of a squadron meant inheriting 60 people's careers, problems, hopes, and fears. I spent the first month learning names, reviewing records, sitting in on training exercises, and establishing my command philosophy. I wasn't trying to be the friendly commander or the hard-ass commander. I was trying to be the confident commander, the one people trusted to make the right call when it mattered. My call sign followed me, of course. Iron Widow wasn't something I could escape. And I didn't try to. The younger pilots looked at me with a mix of respect and curiosity, wondering if the stories were true, if I was really the pilot who'd flown into that hot zone in Helmand. I didn't confirm or deny. I just did the work. 6 months into my command, we deployed to support operations in the Middle East. I flew combat missions while also managing the squadron's operations. A dual role that meant 14-hour days and constant pressure. But I had good people under me, experienced pilots who knew their jobs, junior officers who were hungry to prove themselves, enlisted personnel who kept the machinery running. During one particularly difficult mission, when we were providing cover for a special operations insertion that had gone sideways, I found myself thinking about that night in Helmand, about the decision to stay when Doctrine said to leave, about the calculations that had to be made in seconds, about the weight of knowing lives depended on precision. I made the call to extend our air support window, coordinating with ground commanders and adjusting our fuel reserves to give the team on the ground every possible second. We got them out, all of them. When we debriefed after the mission, one of my younger pilots, a first lieutenant named Kowalski, who'd only been with the squadron for 3 months, asked me how I'd known to make that call. Experience, I said, and understanding that the mission isn't just about following procedure. It's about bringing people home. He nodded, absorbing that. And I saw him file it away for future reference. That's what leadership was. Not grand speeches or dramatic moments, but small lessons transmitted through example, building competence, one mission at a time. Back home, my family's understanding of my career continued to evolve. My mother started reading articles about the Air Force, sending me links to stories about women in combat aviation. My father subscribed to military history magazines and would call with questions about tactics and aircraft capabilities. Even my aunts and uncles, who'd never shown much interest before, started asking substantive questions instead of making polite noises. Ryan called once while I was deployed. The connection was scratchy, but I could hear him clearly enough. Just wanted to check in, he said. Make sure you're okay out there. I'm fine, I said. Good. Your mom's worried, so I figured I'd call and see if you needed anything. It was a small gesture, but significant. Ryan reaching out, not to perform or compete, but just to check in, to be family in the way that actually mattered. I'm good, I said. But thanks for calling. Yeah, well, stay safe. Always do. After I hung up, I sat in my quarters for a moment, thinking about how far we'd both come. Ryan was still figuring himself out, still searching for his place in the world. But he wasn't pretending anymore. Wasn't hiding behind someone else's accomplishments. He was just trying to be decent. And that was progress. Months later, Ryan reached out. Not dramatic, just a text. Asterisk heard about your commendation. Congrats. Beer sometime, asterisk we met at the same backyard. Quieter this time, he admitted. Didn't know what you'd done. Guess I wanted to feel like the tough one. I said, you don't need to be tough to respect someone. Ryan replied, yeah, I get that now. It wasn't reconciliation so much as recognition, and that was enough. The text came through while I was in a staff meeting at Nellis. My phone buzzing against the conference table. I glanced down, saw Ryan's name, and filed it away to deal with later. The meeting ran long. Budget discussions always did. And by the time I got back to my office, it was nearly 1,700 hours. I read the message again. Short, direct, lacking the performative quality his communications used to have. Asterisk heard about your commendation. Congrats. Beer sometime. Asterisk the commendation he was referring to as a meritorious service medal awarded for my work during the deployment and my leadership of the squadron through a complex operational cycle. It wasn't the kind of thing that made headlines, but it was recognized within military circles, and somehow word had filtered back to the family. I typed back, I'm in Nevada. Next time I'm home. His response came 3 minutes later. Asterisk sounds good. Just wanted to say congrats. Asterisk it was 4 months before I made it back to Virginia. A combination of leave and a conference in DC gave me a week on the East Coast, and I spent most of it with my parents. They'd aged in the 2 years since I'd moved to Nevada. Not dramatically, but noticeably. My father moved a little slower. My mother's hair had gone more gray. It reminded me that time was passing, that the people I loved weren't immortal, that I needed to make these visits count. Ryan drove up on a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting on the back porch when he pulled into the driveway, and I watched him get out of his truck, a newer model, work-worn but well-maintained. He'd put on a little weight, but it looked healthy, like he'd stopped trying to maintain the gym-perfect physique that had always seemed more performance than preference. Hey, he called as he walked around the house. Hey. We didn't hug. Just did that half-waving people do when they're not sure how to greet each other. My mother had set out drinks in a cooler, beer, soda, water, and Ryan grabbed 2 beers, handing me one before settling into one of the patio chairs. For a few minutes, we just sat there, drinking and watching the yard. The same yard where we'd played as kids, where I'd been mocked at that barbecue 3 years ago, where the family had gathered dozens of times for cookouts and celebrations. It looked smaller now, or maybe I'd just gotten used to bigger horizons. So, Ryan said finally, Squadron Commander. That's a big deal. It is, I said. How's it going? It's going well. Challenging, but good. He nodded, taking a long pull from his beer. I looked up what that medal was for. The Meritorious Service one. Read about what you have to do to earn it. Wikipedia. I asked, the corner of my mouth twitching. He laughed, a short, genuine sound. Yeah, Wikipedia and some military forums. I wanted to understand. And what did you find? He set his beer down on the table between us, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. That you've been doing this whole other life that none of us understood. That you're responsible for 60 people. That you've flown combat missions I can't even imagine. That you've earned respect in a world where respect actually means something. He paused. And that I spent years making jokes about paperwork. I didn't respond immediately. The truth was I'd let go of most of the resentment years ago. Holding on to it took energy I didn't have, and staying angry at Ryan felt like punishing myself more than him. But hearing him acknowledge it, unprompted, mattered. You didn't know, I said. I should have asked, he countered. That's what I've been thinking about. I should have just asked what you did instead of assuming. Instead of needing to be the one everyone paid attention to, a bird landed on the fence at the edge of the yard. Some small brown thing I couldn't identify. We both watched it for a moment, grateful for the distraction. I wanted to feel like the tough one, Ryan continued, like I had some claim to that world because of my dad. And when you actually lived it, actually did the work, it made me feel small. So I tried to make you smaller instead. He looked at me then. Direct eye contact. That was cowardly. I'm sorry. You already apologized, I said, at the barbecue. That was because my dad made me, he said. This is because I actually understand now. There's a difference. I took a sip of my beer, letting that settle. He was right. There was a difference. The first apology had been about survival, about avoiding his father's disapproval. This one was about growth, about actually seeing what he'd done wrong and owning it. Apology accepted, I said. He nodded, and some of the tension left his shoulders. Thanks. We sat in silence for a bit longer, but it was comfortable now. The kind of quiet that happens between people who've said what needed saying and don't feel compelled to fill every second with noise. So, what are you doing now? I asked. Mom said you left the logistics company. Yeah, I'm working for a nonprofit now, Veterans Services. Helping guys transition back to civilian life, connecting them with resources, that kind of thing. I raised my eyebrows. That's good work. It is, he said. And there was genuine satisfaction in his voice. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not anymore. I'm not a veteran. I didn't serve. But I can still help the people who did. And it turns out I'm pretty good at it. Good at listening, at navigating bureaucracy, at connecting people with what they need. How'd you find it? Dad, actually, Ryan said. After he retired, he started volunteering with them. Told me they needed help and that I should check it out. I figured why not? Went in thinking I'd volunteer for a few weeks and they ended up offering me a job. Commander Hawkins still pushing you in the right direction? I said. Ryan smiled. Yeah, but it's different now. He's not telling me who to be. He's just showing me options and letting me figure it out. And for the first time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, something that's mine. You know? I did know. That feeling of ownership over your work, of building something that reflected your actual values and capabilities rather than someone else's expectations. I knew it intimately. I'm glad, I said, genuinely. Thanks. He finished his beer and reached for another. Can I ask you something? Sure. That night in Helmand, the one my dad talks about. What was that like? I'd been asked that question before, by reporters, by other pilots, by people who wanted a war story to tell at parties. I usually deflected, gave the minimum information necessary to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything real. But this felt different. Ryan wasn't asking for a story. He was asking to understand. It was terrifying, I said. Every alarm in the cockpit going off, tracers coming up from the ground, knowing that if I miscalculated by even a few meters, I'd either miss the target or get shot down. But there were people on the ground who needed help. And I had the training and the aircraft to provide it. So I did. Just like that. Just like that, I said. You don't think about being brave in the moment. You think about the calculations, the angles, the timing. The fear comes later when you're back on the ground and you realize what could have happened. Ryan nodded slowly, processing. My dad talks about you to his SEAL buddies. Did you know that? No, I said, surprised. He does. They ask about family and he mentions me, but then he talks about you, about Iron Widow. Says you're the real deal, that you've got the kind of courage he spent his whole career trying to instill in his teams. I felt my throat tighten. Commander Hawking had never said anything like that to me directly. Praise from him was usually a nod, a brief acknowledgement. The kind of minimalist approval that military men specialized in. Hearing that he spoke well of me when I wasn't around hit differently. That means a lot, I said quietly. He's proud of you, Ryan said. And, honestly, so am I. Took me a while to get there, but I am. We finished our beers as the sun started to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. My mother came out at one point to offer food, but we declined, content to just sit and talk. We covered easier topics after that. His work, my squadron, family gossip, his thoughts about maybe getting back into dating. When he finally stood to leave, we did hug this time, a real one, not the awkward half gesture from earlier. He clapped me on the back and I returned it. Don't be a stranger, he said. I won't. And stay safe out there. Mom worries, but so do I. I will. I watched him drive away, his truck disappearing down the street, and felt something settle inside me. This wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. Wasn't some tearful moment of brotherhood restored. It was quieter than that, more honest. It was two people who'd hurt each other, intentionally and otherwise, finding a way to exist in the same space with mutual respect. My father came out onto the porch as I was gathering up the empty bottles. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. Everything's good. He nodded, understanding in the way he always did without needing lengthy explanations. He's growing up. Finally. We both are, I said. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom with my phone charging on the nightstand, I thought about the distance I'd traveled, literally and figuratively. From the girl who'd been mocked at family gatherings to the squadron commander who'd earned respect through action rather than explanation. From someone who let other people's perceptions define her to someone who knew her own worth, regardless of external validation. Ryan's journey was different, but parallel. He'd been the golden boy who discovered gold leaf was thinner than he thought. And now he was building something real underneath it. We both had to shed versions of ourselves that didn't fit. Had to confront uncomfortable truths about who we were and who we wanted to be. The recognition between us wasn't about forgiveness, exactly. It was about seeing each other clearly for the first time, without the distortions of insecurity and assumption. And that was enough. More than enough. Years later, I returned as Lieutenant Colonel. Commander Hawking had retired. Ryan had a family of his own. When his son ran up to me and saluted, Ryan smiled. He said he knows who Iron Widow is. That was the closure, not revenge, just acknowledgement. I'd learned that credibility doesn't come from explaining yourself. It comes from living it. In the end, the ones who matter already know. The rest, they catch up eventually. I made Lieutenant Colonel at 39, which put me right on track with the typical promotion timeline, but still felt like validation of everything I'd worked toward. The promotion board had looked at my command record, my combat hours, my leadership evaluations, and decided I was ready for the next level. I pinned on the silver oak leaf in a ceremony at Nellis with my squadron in attendance. And for the first time in my career, my parents flew out to Nevada to watch. My mother cried, naturally. My father stood rigid with pride, and when he shook my hand afterward, he said, "Your mother, and I always knew you'd do great things. We just didn't know they'd be this great." It was the most effusive praise I'd ever heard from him, and it meant everything. Commander Hawking, just Jack now, several years into retirement, had sent a letter that arrived the day before the ceremony. It was handwritten, brief, in that economical prose that military men specialized in. Asterisk, congratulations on the promotion. You've earned every bit of it. The community knows your name now and they speak it with respect. That's the legacy that matters. Jack, asterisk, I kept the letter in my desk drawer, pulling it out sometimes when the weight of command felt particularly heavy. Ryan had gotten married 2 years earlier to a woman named Sarah who worked as a teacher. They'd had a son, Evan, who was 4 years old by the time I made Lieutenant Colonel. I'd met them a handful of times during brief visits home, and Sarah seemed good for Ryan, grounded, practical, patient with his occasional lapses into insecurity. She didn't need him to be anyone other than who he was, and that freedom had allowed him to finally settle into himself. The family reunion that summer was bigger than usual. Someone had rented a pavilion at a local park, and there were aunts, uncles, cousins, and assorted family friends I hadn't seen in years. I drove up from Virginia, where I was now stationed at Langley Air Force Base as part of the Air Combat Command staff. The job was more administrative than I preferred, less flying, more planning and policy, but it was a necessary step for senior officers, and I'd learned to find satisfaction in the strategic work, even when I missed the cockpit. I arrived mid-afternoon, still in civilian clothes, jeans and a simple button-down shirt. I'd learned years ago that wearing my uniform to family events created a barrier, made people treat me like a symbol rather than a person. Better to just be Brittany for a few hours, even if the rank and the work were always there underneath. Ryan spotted me first. He was standing near the pavilion with Sarah and Evan, and when he saw me, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Brittany." We hugged. Easy and comfortable now. Sarah gave me a warm smile and a hug of her own. "Good to see you, Brittany. Ryan talks about you all the time." "Good things, I hope," I said. "Always," she said, and the sincerity in her voice suggested she meant it. Evan was hiding halfway behind his father's leg, suddenly shy now that the stranger was actually here. He was small for 4, with Ryan's dark hair and Sarah's thoughtful eyes. Ryan put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Evan, this is your Aunt Brittany. Remember the pilot I told you about?" The boy's eyes went wide. He stepped out from behind Ryan's leg, suddenly less shy and more curious. "You fly airplanes?" "I do," I said, crouching down to his level. "Big ones." "Pretty big fighter jets, mostly." He thought about this for a moment, processing. Then, with the gravity that only small children can muster, he snapped a salute. Hand to forehead, earnest and slightly crooked. I felt something catch in my chest. Without thinking, I returned the salute, crisp and proper. "At ease, airman." He dropped his hand, grinning. Ryan was smiling too, but there was something else in his expression. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction. "He knows who Iron Widow is," he said quietly. I straightened up, looking at Ryan. "You told him." "I did. Figured he should know his aunt is pretty much a legend." "I'm not." "You are," Ryan interrupted gently. "And it's okay to let people know that. Especially family." Evan was already moving on, his attention captured by other cousins running past. But the moment lingered between Ryan and me. This was the closure I hadn't known I needed. Not an apology, not even acknowledgement of past wrongs. But this. Ryan teaching his son to respect what I'd done, passing down an understanding that had taken him years to develop. "Thank you," I said. He shrugged. "It's just the truth." The afternoon stretched out in the easy rhythm of family gatherings. Food appeared on long tables. Someone's famous potato salad, burgers and hot dogs from the grill, a sheet cake that said, "Welcome home, Brittany." Even though I technically lived in Virginia now and this was just a visit, my mother had organized most of it, recruiting aunts and cousins to help. And the result was the kind of abundant, slightly chaotic spread that defined family events. Jack Hawking arrived late, walking with a slight limp that hadn't been there the last time I'd seen him. He'd had knee surgery, he explained when I asked. A delayed consequence of 30 years of jumping out of perfectly good aircraft and running on unforgiving terrain. Retirement had been good to him otherwise. He looked relaxed, less burdened by the constant weight of command decisions. We found a quiet spot away from the main crowd, sitting at a picnic table while the party continued around us. Lieutenant Colonel, he said, testing out the rank. Has a nice ring to it. Feels good, I admit it. Different, but good. Command track. Possibly. They've mentioned it. Wing commander in a few years, if things go well. He nodded approvingly. You'll be good at it. You've got the temperament, calm under pressure, good tactical mind, able to see the strategic picture without losing sight of the people. Learn from the best, I said. He laughed. Don't give me too much credit. You were always going to be exactly who you are. I just made sure my son didn't get in your way permanently. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the family. Evan was playing tag with a group of other kids, his high-pitched laughter carrying across the park. Ryan was helping at the grill, actually useful rather than performative. Sarah was talking with my mother and Aunt Marianne, already integrated into the family dynamic. He's doing better, Jack said, following my gaze to Ryan. Took him longer than I would have liked, but he got there. He did, I agreed. And you never made it easy on him by being anything other than excellent, Jack said. That's a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one. You gave him something to measure himself against, something real instead of just my shadow. I considered that. I'd never thought about it that way, that my presence, my accomplishments might have actually helped Ryan by forcing him to confront his own choices. But maybe Jack was right. Maybe we both needed each other to become who we were meant to be. I'm proud of both of you, Jack said. Different paths, different struggles, but you both figured it out. As the sun started to set and people began packing up, Evan ran over to me one more time. His shirt was grass-stained, his face flushed from running, but he was beaming. Will you come back again? He asked. Absolutely, I said. And will you tell me about flying? I glanced at Ryan, who nodded encouragingly. I will. Next time I'm home, we'll sit down and I'll tell you all about it. Cool. He started to run off, then turned back. Thanks for keeping people safe. It was such a simple statement, delivered with the uncomplicated sincerity that children specialize in, but it hit me harder than any formal commendation or promotion ever had. This was why the work mattered. Not for the medals or the rank, but for the people who got to go home safe, who got to raise their kids and live their lives, because someone was overhead when they needed help. You're welcome, I said, my voice a little thick. Driving back to Virginia that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The girl who joined the Air Force to prove something, who'd earned her wings and her call sign and her rank through work that most people would never understand. The woman who learned that credibility doesn't come from explaining yourself, that respect is earned through action rather than words, that the people who matter already know your worth. I thought about Ryan, finally comfortable in his own skin, teaching his son to respect service without needing to claim it for himself. About Commander Hawking, passing his wisdom forward to the next generation. About my parents, proud even when they didn't fully understand. About all the pilots I'd trained, the missions I'd flown, the lives that had intersected with mine in briefing rooms and cockpits and combat zones. The call sign had defined me for years. Iron Widow. The pilot who didn't leave people behind. But somewhere along the way, I'd learned that I was more than that. I was a daughter, a cousin, a commander, a mentor. I was all the versions of myself that I'd built through choices and consequences, through failures and successes, through the quiet accumulation of experience that turned potential into purpose. In the end, revenge had never been the point. I'd never needed Ryan to suffer or to grovel. I just needed him to see me clearly. And I'd needed to stop waiting for his approval to feel valid. The moment I'd stopped explaining myself and started simply living my truth, everything else had fallen into place. The ones who mattered already knew. The rest caught up eventually. And the few who never did? They were irrelevant to the actual work, to the mission, to the life I was building, one decision at a time. I made it back to my apartment near Langley at 0100 hours, exhausted but satisfied. Tomorrow, I'd be back in uniform, back in briefings, back in the constant forward motion of military service. But tonight, I was just Brittany, carrying the weight of family and legacy and all the versions of myself that had brought me here. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.